August the 2nd, 216 BC. 8,400 Roman soldiers marched toward what they believed would be their greatest triumph. By sunset, 50,000 of them would lie dead in a space smaller than a modern football stadium. This wasn't just a defeat. This was systematic butchery on a scale that still haunts military historians 2,200 years later. Think about those numbers for a second. 50,000 men killed in just 4 hours. That's more than 200 deaths per minute. More than 3 human beings erased from existence every single second for 4 straight hours. The mathematics alone seem impossible. But what happened at Cannae wasn't just mathematically impossible. It was tactically revolutionary, psychologically devastating, and strategically baffling. By the end of this story, you'll understand how one man trapped an army twice his size and turned military science into an art form painted in Roman blood. You'll discover why the greatest tactical victory in history might also have been the greatest strategic mistake. And you'll learn why military academies from West Point to Sandhurst still study this single afternoon of slaughter as the perfect example of battlefield genius. 3 questions have puzzled historians for over 2 millennia. How did Hannibal make 86,400 disciplined Roman soldiers so tightly packed they couldn't even raise their weapons to defend themselves? Why did the Romans walk straight into an obvious trap, despite having commanders who could see what was happening? And most baffling of all, why didn't Hannibal march on Rome immediately after achieving the most complete military victory in human history? The answers involve a crescent that became a coffin, cavalry that decided the fate of empires, and one man's refusal to use his greatest triumph. But first, you need to understand the road that led Rome's largest army ever assembled to a dusty plain in southeastern Italy where death waited in formation. The year 216 BC found Rome in existential terror. For 2 years, a foreign invader had been carving through Italy like a knife through flesh, winning battle after impossible battle. At the Trebia River, Hannibal had lured a Roman army into a freezing river crossing and slaughtered them in the water. At Lake Trasimene, he'd ambushed another Roman force in the fog, driving 15,000 men into the lake where they drowned in their armor while trying to escape. The psychological impact was devastating. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Rome was the superpower of the Mediterranean. Their legions were the most disciplined, most feared military force in the known world. They didn't lose battles on their own soil. They certainly didn't lose to some Carthaginian upstart who'd crossed the Alps with elephants like he was leading a circus parade. But Hannibal Barca wasn't just some upstart. He was the most dangerous military mind Rome had ever faced. And by the summer of 216 BC, the Roman Senate had reached its breaking point. No more defensive strategies. No more avoiding battle. No more waiting for Hannibal to make mistakes. The Senate demanded total war and complete annihilation. They would raise an army so massive, so overwhelming in its power, that no tactical genius could overcome sheer crushing force. The numbers they assembled defied precedent. Rome typically fielded armies of 20,000 to 30,000 men. For Cannae, they raised 86,400, 8 full legions plus an equal number of allied troops. This wasn't just an army, it was a statement. Rome was done playing defensive. They would bury Hannibal under the weight of Roman steel and Roman bodies. Command of this massive force fell to 2 consuls, as Roman tradition demanded. Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus would alternate daily command, a system that worked fine in normal circumstances, but would prove catastrophic when facing a genius. Varro was a populist, a man of the people who'd risen through Roman politics by promising aggressive action. The common citizens loved him because he spoke their language of revenge and dominance. The Senate aristocrats despised him because he lacked noble birth, and more dangerously, lacked battlefield experience that taught caution. Varro believed in Roman superiority with religious fervor. Give him enough soldiers, and he'd crush any enemy through sheer disciplined force. Tactics were for Greeks and Carthaginians. Romans won through courage, discipline, and overwhelming mass. Paulus represented everything Varro wasn't. Experienced, cautious, aristocratic, respected by both Senate and soldiers. He'd commanded armies before. He'd seen what happened when commanders underestimated enemies or overestimated their own advantages. Paulus looked at the situation in Italy and saw danger in every direction. Yes, they had numbers. But Hannibal had already proven twice that numbers didn't guarantee victory. The Carthaginian was like a ghost, appearing where least expected, fighting in ways that broke every conventional rule. Paulus wanted to move slowly, carefully, forcing Hannibal to fight on Roman terms or starve trying to avoid battle. The two men argued constantly. Every command decision became a debate. Every strategic choice required compromise. Their junior officers watched this tension with growing unease. An army with two heads was an army that couldn't think straight, but the Senate had been clear. March south. Find Hannibal. Destroy him. No more excuses. No more delays. Rome's reputation, Rome's security, Rome's very identity as the dominant power depended on crushing this Carthaginian threat once and for all. In late July 216 BC, this massive army began its march. The sight of 86,400 soldiers moving in formation was something Italy had never witnessed. The column stretched for miles, the sound of marching feet like distant thunder. Citizens in towns they passed came out to cheer, to pray, to offer food and wine. This was Rome's vengeance made manifest. Mothers held up children to see the legions pass, telling them to remember this sight when Rome's enemies lay broken. Hannibal watched them come. His scouts had been tracking the Roman buildup for weeks, reporting numbers that should have caused panic. Any sane commander facing 86,000 enemies with barely 50,000 soldiers would have retreated, avoided battle, preserved his army to fight another day. Hannibal wasn't sane by conventional military standards. He was something far more dangerous. He saw the Roman numbers not as overwhelming force, but as opportunity. A massive, unwieldy, overconfident army led by arguing commanders who alternated control daily. If he could just get them to fight on his terms, in the place of his choosing, at the time of his selection, those numbers could become a weapon against Rome itself. He positioned his army near a grain depot at Cannae, a small village in southeastern Italy. The location was calculated genius. The grain depot was valuable enough that Rome couldn't ignore it. Taking it would give Hannibal supplies for months. Letting him hold it would be seen as weakness. The terrain around Cannae offered flat plains perfect for the massive Roman formations. At least, that's what it would look like to Roman commanders eager for battle. The Aufidus River on one side of the plain would constrain the battlefield, limiting Roman options to maneuver. And the ground itself, dusty and dry in August heat, would become part of the trap. Hannibal set up camp and waited. He knew Roman pride and Roman pressure from their Senate would bring them to him. On August 1st, the Roman army arrived at Cannae. Varro wanted to attack immediately. Paulus counseled caution, waiting for better conditions, better intelligence about Hannibal's dispositions. They argued through the afternoon and into evening. The soldiers set up camp, exhausted from the march, expecting battle soon. That night, nervous energy rippled through both armies. Romans sharpened weapons, checked armor, wrote final letters home to families. Many couldn't sleep, knowing that tomorrow might bring glory or death. Hannibal slept soundly. He'd done everything he could to prepare. Now it was time to let Roman aggression do the rest. August 2nd dawned clear and hot, Varro's day to command. He ordered the army to battle formation immediately after dawn. Paulus objected one final time, pointing out the wind was blowing dust directly into Roman faces. The sun would be in their eyes as they advanced. The terrain favored cavalry action where Rome was weakest. Varro overruled him with brutal simplicity. We have 86,400 soldiers. Hannibal has perhaps 50,000. We will crush him through sheer weight of numbers. No more delay. No more caution. Today, we end this. Hannibal Barca stood before his army as the sun climbed toward midday. This wasn't his first battle, wouldn't be his last, but everything he'd worked for since childhood led to this moment. The Roman army across the plain represented everything he hated with focused intensity. Not the soldiers themselves, but what they stood for. Roman arrogance, Roman imperialism, Roman certainty that their way was the only way. Hannibal had been 9 years old when his father made him swear an oath, placing his small hand on the blood sacrifice and promising eternal hatred of Rome. That oath had shaped every decision, every battle plan, every risk he'd taken since. Some men fought for glory or gold. Hannibal fought to fulfill a blood promise made by a child who hadn't understood what eternal meant. His army composition told the story of his campaign. 40,000 infantry from half a dozen cultures and nations. Gauls from the north, tall and fierce, fighting nearly naked, their bodies painted blue for war. Spanish warriors with their deadly short swords, veterans of tribal conflicts that made Roman battles look civilized. Numidian light infantry, skirmishers who could throw javelins with accuracy that defied belief. And the core, the unbreakable center of his force, the African veterans. These men had been with him since Spain. They'd crossed the Alps, fought at Trebia, survived Trasimene. They wore Roman armor now, taken from dead legionaries, a psychological touch that would confuse and demoralize their opponents. His cavalry numbered 10,000, but these weren't ordinary horsemen. The Numidians rode without saddles or stirrups, controlling their mounts through balance and will alone. They could shoot arrows at full gallop, wheel and charge with fluid precision that Roman cavalry couldn't match. The Spanish and Gallic heavy cavalry were shock troops, armored and fierce, perfect for the smashing charges that broke enemy formations. Leading them was Hasdrubal, not Hannibal's brother, but one of his most capable officers, a man who understood cavalry warfare like poets understand verse. The cavalry would decide this battle. Hannibal knew it. His officers knew it. The Romans, focused on their infantry superiority, had somehow missed this crucial detail. The plain of Cannae stretched flat and dusty under the August sun. Deceptively simple terrain that would soon become the most studied killing ground in military history. To Roman eyes, it looked perfect for their style of warfare. Flat ground meant their massive formations could maintain cohesion. No forests to break up their lines, no hills to complicate their advance, just open space where Roman discipline and Roman numbers would crush Carthaginian desperation. They couldn't have been more wrong about what this ground would mean for them. The Roman formation was textbook perfect and fatally flawed. 86,400 soldiers arranged in rectangular blocks that stretched across the plain like mobile fortresses. The heavy infantry formed the center, compressed together until each man had barely 2 feet of space. This wasn't accidental. Roman doctrine emphasized mass and pressure. Pack soldiers so tightly that the formation became an unstoppable battering ram of flesh and steel. Across the dusty space, Hannibal's army formed up in a shape that should have been impossible. The crescent, with its center pushed forward and wings held back, looked weak to Roman observers. It looked like Hannibal was trying to match Roman width despite having fewer soldiers, which meant spreading his forces dangerously thin. The Romans saw desperation. They saw weakness. They saw the exact outcome they had hoped for. They should have seen the jaws of a trap preparing to close. The center of Hannibal's crescent consisted of his Gallic and Spanish infantry, brave and fierce but less disciplined than Roman legionaries. About 20,000 men formed this forward bulge, standing in alternating units. They were positioned to take the first impact of Roman assault, to fight and slowly give ground, to draw the Romans deeper into the formation. As mid-morning approached, both armies stood ready. 400 men in formation under the blazing sun, waiting for the signal to begin killing each other. The dust already rising from thousands of feet, shifting position, the sound of final orders being shouted, weapons being checked one last time, prayers being whispered to different gods. Then Varro gave the order to advance. The Roman army began moving forward, 400 soldiers in perfect formation, marching toward the Carthaginian center with the confidence of men who believed themselves invincible. The jaws of the trap waited patiently for them to march far enough inside. The battle began with thunder on both flanks, as cavalry collided in the kind of brutal close quarters fighting that turned mounted warfare into organized murder. On the Roman left wing, facing Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry, the fight lasted barely minutes before becoming a massacre. Hasdrubal had trained his cavalry for exactly this moment. They didn't just charge. They attacked in waves, smashing into the Roman line, pulling back, then hitting again before the Romans could reform. Then, Hasdrubal played his trump card. Instead of continuing the grinding fight, he ordered his cavalry to dismount. The heavy cavalry, trained for mounted combat, jumped from their horses and attacked the Roman cavalry on foot. Within minutes, the Roman left-wing cavalry wasn't just losing, they were breaking. In less than 10 minutes, the Roman left-wing cavalry was gone, killed or scattered across the plain in full retreat. On the Roman right wing, the fight was playing out differently, but heading toward the same conclusion. Numidian light cavalry weren't built for the kind of crushing charges that won quick victories. They were skirmishers, harassers, experts at hit-and-run tactics. The Roman right-wing cavalry found themselves chasing shadows. Then Hasdrubal's heavy cavalry arrived behind them. The Roman right-wing cavalry, already tired from chasing Numidians, already frustrated and disorganized, suddenly found themselves caught between two enemy forces. The panic was immediate and total. Both Roman cavalry wings were now destroyed or scattered. The flanks were wide open. While cavalry battles decided the flanks, the main Roman infantry advanced with mechanical confidence toward Hannibal's center. 70,000 heavy infantry in massive rectangular blocks, moving forward in perfect formation. The first contact came with the shock of armies colliding. Roman javelins flew first, dark clouds of iron-tipped wood arcing toward the Carthaginian center. Then the legionaries hit the line with swords drawn. The Gauls and Spanish fought hard, but they also began to give ground, step by step, falling back under Roman pressure. Varro, watching from behind the lines, smiled. This was going according to his plan. The Roman formation compressed even tighter as soldiers in the rear ranks pushed forward, adding their weight to the assault. The crescent wasn't breaking, it was bending. The forward bulge was becoming a bowl. The Romans weren't breaking through. They were being funneled into an ever-narrowing space. On both sides of this bending center, Hannibal's African veterans stood untouched and watching. Their orders were simple. Hold position. Don't engage yet. Wait for the signal. The Roman advance continued, 50 yards deep into the crescent, then 70, then 100. The crescent bent further. Varro pushed his forces faster. He could feel victory approaching, just a bit more pressure. Behind them, Hasdrubal's cavalry finished destroying the Roman right wing and began moving into position. The African veterans on both flanks gripped their weapons tighter. The jaws were almost ready to close. Then Hannibal gave the signal that would echo through military history for the next 200 years. The African veterans on both flanks pivoted inward. The jaws began to close. The African veterans, standing untouched on both flanks of the crescent, finally received the order they'd been waiting for since dawn. Pivot inward. Attack the Roman flanks. They moved with precision that shocked even their own allies. In less than 2 minutes, the battlefield geometry had transformed completely. The Romans, packed tightly in the center, pushing forward with all their mass, suddenly found enemies attacking them from directions they'd never prepared for. The Roman soldiers on the flanks tried to turn to face this new threat, but they were packed too tightly. The result was chaos and compression. Then Hasdrubal's cavalry, having destroyed both Roman cavalry wings, completed their ride around the entire battlefield. They appeared behind the Roman army, 6,000 horsemen positioning themselves to block any retreat. The Romans were now surrounded on 3 sides: front, flanks, and rear. The encirclement was complete. 86,400 Romans trapped in a space that kept shrinking as Carthaginian forces compressed from 3 directions. Inside the Roman formation, comprehension dawned slowly, and then all at once, they were trapped. The panic started at the edges and spread inward like disease. The compression became unbearable. Men were packed so tightly they couldn't raise their arms, couldn't swing weapons, couldn't even fall down when killed because the press of bodies kept them upright. Consul Paulus, fighting near the front, understood before most. He'd seen the cavalry destroyed, seen the African veterans pivot, seen Hasdrubal's horsemen completing the encirclement. He knew what came next. This wasn't battle anymore. This was slaughter. He fought with the desperation of a man who knew he was dead but refused to die easily. He took wound after wound, a spear in his side, a sword slash across his leg, an arrow in his shoulder. He kept fighting because that's what Roman consuls did. Varro, in the rear of the formation, finally understood his disaster. Taking a small group of cavalry that hadn't been completely destroyed, he fled the battlefield, left 80,000 soldiers to die while he escaped. The Carthaginian forces showed no mercy, because mercy would have been impossible, even if they'd wanted to give it. The Romans were too packed together. They died where they stood, crushed together, some killed by Carthaginian weapons, others suffocating in the press of their own army. The slaughter continued through the hottest part of the day, hour after hour of mechanical killing. Carthaginian soldiers reported their arms getting tired from swinging weapons. The Aufidus River ran red with Roman blood. Literally, men dying near its banks fell into the water. Consul Paulus died as a Roman consul should, fighting to the last. By late afternoon, the fighting was mostly over. The statistics emerging from this horror were almost impossible to believe. 50,000 Romans dead at minimum. Some ancient sources claimed 70,000. 14,000 Romans were captured. Maybe 15,000 escaped. From an army of 86,400 men, Rome had lost at least 85% killed or captured. Hannibal's casualties were remarkably light. 6,000 dead. The kill ratio was approximately 12-1. This didn't happen in ancient warfare. Cannae wasn't a battle. It was a massacre dressed up in military terms. As the sun set on August 2nd, 216 BC, the battlefield presented a scene from hell itself. Bodies carpeted the ground so thickly that you couldn't walk without stepping on the dead. Hannibal walked the battlefield as evening approached. His officers begged him to march on Rome immediately. The road was open. Rome's armies were destroyed. Hannibal refused. His cavalry commander Hannibal reportedly said, "You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you don't know how to use one." History would debate this decision for the next 2,200 years. The immediate aftermath in Rome was psychological devastation beyond military defeat. Word reached the city within days. 50,000 dead. Panic was total. But Rome did something that would define its character for the next 600 years. They refused to surrender. The Senate passed emergency measures. They armed slaves. They released criminals. They refused to ransom prisoners. Rome signaled that surrender was never an option. Varro's fate showed Roman pragmatism. He'd fled the battlefield, but the Senate thanked him for not despairing of the Republic. Rome adopted a strategy later called Fabian. Shadow Hannibal. Avoid battle. Let Italy's size and Rome's resources slowly wear down the Carthaginian army. Hannibal would remain in Italy for 13 more years, but he'd never achieve another Cannae. By 203 BC, he was recalled to Africa. At Zama in 202 BC, Hannibal faced Scipio Africanus, who had studied Cannae obsessively. Scipio copied Hannibal's tactics and beat him. The student had learned from the master. Military academies would study Cannae for the next 2,200 years. Every general who dreamed of perfect victory studied Hannibal's tactics. Napoleon examined Cannae. The German General Staff analyzed it. Norman Schwarzkopf referenced it during Desert Storm. The battle represented the holy grail of military planning. Complete victory through superior tactics despite inferior numbers. The double envelopment became fundamental to military theory. The debate still rages about Hannibal's decision not to march on Rome after Cannae. One side argues that marching immediately might have won the war. The other side argues that Rome's walls were still formidable, that siege warfare wasn't Hannibal's strength. The truth probably lies between. Cannae was a tactical masterpiece that didn't achieve strategic victory because perfect battles don't automatically win wars. Modern military analysis recognizes Cannae as both the peak of ancient tactical warfare and a cautionary tale. Hannibal proved that a commander could achieve seemingly impossible victory through innovation and daring. But he also proved that winning every battle doesn't matter if you can't translate tactical success into strategic victory. Rome lost Cannae, but won the war because they understood something Hannibal didn't. Wars aren't won by destroying armies. They're won by destroying the enemy's will to continue fighting. Rome's will was unbreakable. The Roman psychological trauma from Cannae lasted for generations. Hannibal at the gates became a phrase that meant existential terror. This eventually led to Carthage's complete annihilation in 146 BC. The Third Punic War ended with Carthage literally erased from the earth, Rome ensuring that the city that produced Hannibal could never threaten them again. The historical irony runs deep. Hannibal achieved the most perfect tactical victory in ancient warfare, and yet Rome won the war, built an empire that shaped Western civilization. Cannae became a footnote in Rome's story of ultimate triumph. The question haunts anyone who studies this battle. What if Hannibal had marched on Rome that August evening? We can't know. History only records what happened, not what might have been. What we do know is that August 2nd, 216 BC represents both the peak of ancient military genius and a reminder that even perfect victories have limits. Hannibal trapped 86,400 Romans and slaughtered them in 4 hours through tactical innovation that military theorists still study. He proved that numbers don't guarantee victory when facing a commander who understands how to turn mass into paralysis. But he also proved that winning the battle isn't the same as winning the war. Cannae remains the most studied tactical victory in military history, and it remains a reminder that even perfection has its limits. Sometimes the most complete victory is still just a single day in a longer story. And sometimes the army that loses the battle wins the war through sheer refusal to accept defeat.